Thanks very much for joining today. My name is Dustin Hosseini. I'm going to be your chair. I'm volunteering. I work at Glasgow University, where I work in the Learning Innovation Support Unit in library, and I study a doctorate in education part-time. So that's why I'm here chairing this event, because diversity and inclusion are important to me. Our first talk is Equity, Diversity, Inclusion, Understanding International Students' Digital Shock by Sarah Knight, Tabetha Newman, Mike Gulliver, and Elizabeth Newall. You were the first one on the list. So everyone give a round of applause. Just quickly, each one's about 20 minutes, and then we'll do 10 minutes of Q&A after each one. Thank you. All right.
Get my timer started. Okay, well, it's lovely to be here. I'm speaking on behalf of a number of colleagues to introduce you to our work at JISC on international students' digital experience. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Diana Catana, who is a PhD student at King's College London. She's been in the UK higher education system since her first degree, undergraduate studies. And as you'll see from the slide, she's here today as an UKISA International Student Ambassador, and you'll be hearing from Diana in a short while. So what I want to do to begin with is just to talk you through the rationale behind why we're undertaking this research into international students' digital experience. Firstly, I mean, I really don't need to tell a room full of ALT delegates that COVID accelerated the use of digital technologies in teaching and learning. But it is worth us just taking a moment to reflect that digital technologies are now embedded throughout the student life cycle, and that starts prior to a course beginning with application and runs through to graduation. Secondly, international students constitute a significant proportion of our overall student population in the UK. The latest HESA statistics tell us that 680,000 students are with us in the UK in higher education, and that population can be seen as 17% of full-time undergraduate students and 67% of taught postgrads also on a full-time basis. Moreover, at JISC, we heard from our members that the pandemic shone a light in particular on the digital experiences of international students, and that the issues were seen not just with access to technology, but also in terms of the expectations being placed on its use within teaching and learning. So what we want to do at JISC is build on quite a number of years now of research into student digital experience, not least through the last 7 years of running the insight surveys. But whilst international students are part of the Digital Experience Insight Survey dataset, their unique experiences prior to arrival on their courses in the UK, as well as throughout their programmes of study, have not been captured by that series of surveys. And what we found actually is that this is an area that is quite under-researched, and so we wanted to address that. And in addressing this gap, as you'll see from the slide there, we've spoken to a number of sector bodies across the UK, and we've also spoken to higher education providers in order to start to develop some intelligence in this area. So we embarked upon a multi-phase research project. The first phase of which resulted in a report that was published in April of this year. If you want to scan the QR code or take a note of the URL there, you will get through to, I think it's an 80-page report, isn't it, Sarah? And this basically summarises the literature review, and also gives an account of what sector bodies who are supporting international students, as well as sector bodies supporting learning technologies, are experiencing or observing in terms of international student engagement with digital. And phase two has now concluded. Phase two has given us an opportunity to talk directly to international students at a number of institutions across the UK. And I'll be saying a little bit more about that in due course. we will be publishing the results of that data a bit later on in the autumn. Thought it would be useful at this point just to say a little bit about who the international students, or where our international students are coming from. So a little bit about student recruitment. The 680,000 students that I mentioned just a moment ago come to us from over 200 different countries and territories. The graph that you see on the screen here is from HESA, and it indicates some of the sharp increases and decreases we've seen over the last couple of years. I'm just going to move to this overhead. The blue line at the top there indicates the Chinese students are kind of leveling off in terms of recruitment at the moment. But what we can see is a sharp increase in students coming from India, as denoted by the orange line. The grey line refers to other Asian countries, and within that we're talking about Pakistan predominantly. And then this pale blue line refers to Nigeria. And not surprisingly, you've probably worked out for yourself that the yellow line, sadly, is the drop-off that we've seen in EU students. What would be really helpful for us on the research project, as well as hopefully for yourselves, is if you wouldn't mind scanning this QR code, and either as I'm continuing to talk or perhaps a bit later on, share with us what your observations have been at your institutions in terms of international student use of digital and interactions with learning more generally. Just leave that for a moment for you to scan. There we go. So I just wanted to summarise the recommendations that came out of the first report, because I think this hopefully points you towards our key findings. In the first instance, we're recommending to institutions that information and guidance is given to international students well before they arrive in the UK, not just in terms of what technology to bring, but again, helping with those expectations around how it's going to be used in teaching and learning. Secondly, also on the subject of pre-arrival support, we are suggesting that institutions use their digital technologies to help build communities, again, amongst international students before they arrive on course, as this has been shown to really help with induction and to smooth course integration. The third recommendation moves us into the realm of institutional strategy. And what we're really calling institutions to be thinking about is the integration of their international strategies with others at that top level. So whether that is the digital strategy, EDI strategy, or those around teaching and learning. What we have seen within the literature is that international students experience something that's referred to as digital shock. And that when that is combined with learning shock and cultural shock, that this can negatively impact students for weeks, if not months, when they arrive and start with us at our UK institutions. And so it would be of benefit for staff across the institution to develop an understanding of the transitional issues for students. Moving on from that, what we've also seen is that teaching and learning can look very, very different in other countries to how it is that we provide teaching and learning within the UK. And so again, it would be really helpful to really start to look at our own teaching and learning through the lens of international students coming to us. The diagram on the screen here really is a really nice illustration of how equitable provision and equality of provision are really two quite different things. And so in order to provide smooth digital border crossings for students, we are recommending that institutions provide equitable rather than equal provision. And finally, that with 680,000 students coming to us from overseas, from over 200 different countries and territories, that we really do need to stop thinking about international students as one homogenous group. So very briefly, I just want to say a little bit about our phase 2 research. This is comprised both across institutional survey. We've worked with 14 partner institutions to deliver that survey. And we've also made site visits to 10 different university locations across the UK in order to speak with 150 individual international students. We've gathered with the survey over 2,000 responses, and the questions within the survey relate to prior experience of digital technology before coming to the UK, personal use of devices and software, and then looking at use of digital technologies within teaching and learning on course. And what the graphic shows, so a little bit of a data reveal here ahead of publication, is that over 50% of international students have reported having had power cuts that have impacted their ability to engage with online technologies. Here we see that 4 out of 5 survey respondents are taught postgraduates, and that the majority are from Africa and Asia. And then at the bottom there, again, just wanted to give you a little bit of data ahead of publication. And what you'll see here is that a quarter of international students surveyed are now, have reported that Wi-Fi in their home countries was worse, or they didn't have Wi-Fi at all in their home countries before coming to the UK. With the focus group activity, we wanted to encourage students to not just report their digital experiences in terms of the digital that they use, but also to share something of how they feel about using digital technologies as well. In terms of the students who attended, this maps very closely to where we're seeing the greatest growth in international student recruitment at the moment, so in terms of Asia and Africa. And what I think is particularly significant to our findings is that the majority of the students we saw not only were PGTs, but they were mature students who were already professionals and had career histories. So finally, before I introduce Diana, I just wanted to share a little bit of insight with you from some of the discussions we had in the students who had been brought together to the focus groups to talk about their digital experiences, absolutely wanted to use the opportunity to share some of the wider issues that they were facing being a student in the UK. So namely in terms of being able to find accommodation, accessing healthcare, using transport, being a mature student, and finding a sense of belonging as a student as well. So I'd now like to introduce Diana, who has been with us at one of our focus groups. She helped co-facilitate one of our focus groups. So Diana, I just wondered whether you might like to share some of your experiences and observations with the group here. And the first question really is to ask in terms of your own personal experience. Can you say something about what digital shock you experienced coming to the UK?
Of course. Okay, it's working. Hello, everyone. So I first came into the UK in 2016 to do my undergraduate in biochemistry at UCL. And just to set a bit the scene, I was terribly homesick. I didn't want to have to deal with anyone, talk to anyone. I just was in my own bubble. First lecture, I need to go to a big lecture theater with 300 people. I haven't seen a class bigger than 30 at that point in time. 300 people, I entered the room. My parents told me beforehand, when we went to university, we always had to have pen and paper to take notes. Don't be disrespectful, don't, waste the time of the lecturer. Well, I go ready with my pen and paper and I enter and I see Macs everywhere, laptops, Macs, everything. All of a sudden, I just feel like I don't belong here. I feel very poor, like I feel like I don't have the technologies that I needed to attend these lectures. Everything was on slides, nothing was on books like I was used to during my schooling years back home in Romania. So already I didn't have any people to connect with. I would only hang out really with people that were in the same position as me. So people who didn't have laptops coming to the lecture theaters and taking notes by paper and trying to figure out how to work out Moodle, because I was using Moodle at the time, and how to set up this Outlook email that at that point in time felt so impossible. But now I use it so often that I just laugh thinking that that felt like such a big sort of thing to cross, but that's the reality of it. When you have so many things going on in the background, every sort of extra thing that you need to adapt to feels very hard.
Thank you, Diana, for sharing that with us. And what do you think might have mitigated that digital shock for you?
I think I would have liked a heads up, to be honest. Like, not necessarily in the sense that, oh, you need to bring a laptop, because I do realize that's not feasible for everyone. But to tell me, you know, if you don't have a laptop, we have the library services, you can have a one-day loan or something. Or at least tell me, we are going to use Moodle or this virtual learning environment. This is how it works. Let's create a page where I could have sort of accessed and see how a quiz worked, how you download the lectures, something to sort of get used to it, not necessarily see already the lectures beforehand. Just like a taster session if you wanted.
Thank you. Moving on from that, given that you've co-facilitated one of our focus groups, just wondered whether you could share with everyone what differences and challenges have you observed international students reporting in relation to their learning experiences in UK higher education?
Definitely. I would say they sort of gravitated around two big themes. One of them was referencing. It does seem that many students that come from the public schooling system from their countries, they don't know how to reference properly. They don't know how it works or why is it even necessary. The issue here is that academics are very sort of clear about how bad it is if you plagiarize. And this just increases the anxiety around sort of referencing. And depending on the culture, some students can advocate and ask more questions, but some of them prefer to find ways to find these answers about referencing. They wouldn't necessarily go to the lecturer or tutor or whatever, because they think they'll be remembered badly for not knowing this sort of basic level things. And from this sort of point of view, you already have a barrier, which is quite difficult to traverse. And they keep asking amongst their peers to see, how can I actually reference this? And as you know, you can hear from some friends, but they don't necessarily know the best answers. And you already sort of miss out on some students' sort of education over here. And then on the other big sort of point was that the marking schemes here in the UK. So here, 17% first means a very good mark, whereas in other countries, it has to be over 90%. Some parents like to be like helicopters and ask about marks, ask about the hierarchy in the classes. And when students come and say, well, I don't know where I placed, but I have 70%, or they'd be like, you failed, what did you do? Like, how parents can get visibly upset about these sort of things. And also on the sort of point of marking schemes, they can be a bit vague or too generic for students. The feedback comes like, you needed to be more critical, use more academic language. But what does that mean? Some international students just don't have the feedback literacy. They can't read this or understand what you actually mean by this. They want more concrete examples I wrote this, okay, it's wrong, but how was it meant to be rewritten to be correct according to your scheme? Or they also report preferring more detailed marking schemes because they can't read the minds of the lecturers marking the essays. Yeah.
Thank you. Diana, you've talked about both learning and digital shocks for international students. How do you see them impacting one another?
I think they're both sort of layers from the same problem, pretty much integration of students in the UK higher education system. If you think about UK education, it is digital, whether we like it or not, we can call it a digital education. So obviously the digital shock will impact the learning experience of students. And if you want me to give you a really menial example, think about assessments that are essay-based on Moodle. Some students can't type fast enough their answers. Some students are used to writing exams by hand. So this is a very sort of menial example of what can happen where digital shock and the sort of learning shocks come together. But it applies to all sorts of layers. And as I mentioned previously, it just adds to the problems that international students have to cross. If you really want to draw the line, you can look at it in this way. British students might be better adapted to this learning environment. International students have to do extra work, extra steps. And having to work extra to just be on par can be frustrating. and just takes away from the time you can socialize, learn, enjoy the place, because many students come here for the place, for the country, to enjoy, to learn the culture, to talk to everyone. And this sort of gap, them having to cross it, just takes away from their time. So yeah.
Thank you. So just to finish off before opening to questions, we will be reporting on our phase 2 research later in the autumn. So you will get to hear from the over 2,000 international students who gave their voice through the survey, and the 150 students who we met as we were facilitating focus group activity. Once we have published that data and a discussion of the findings, we will then be looking to issue a series of briefing papers, probably in the early months of 2024. If you would like to be kept informed of our progress with the research, then again, please feel free to take a photograph of this QR code, or you should find it, and Sarah's going to, yes, flash a card up in front of you there. There are some postcards that also have the same link on as well, and we'll add you to our mailing list. We're also delighted to share with you that the Digital Experience Insights Student Survey has, the report from that survey has been published. It went live yesterday. So again, by following the link on the screen here, if you want to get a sense for what the main headlines are this year from, I think it was about 37,000 students who contributed to the data set, then again, feel free to take a copy of this code. And then finally, one final ask from ourselves. If what we've shared with you, any of the points that Diana has raised, or some of the findings that I've shared with you resonate with you, it'd be particularly helpful for us to hear what you might be taking back into your practice for further discussion or action. So if you wouldn't mind adding something to this Padlet, that would be great. And we would love you to stay in touch with us. So thank you very much for listening. Very happy to take questions in the final few minutes before we hand over to Anna.
I'm going to repeat questions. Okay, so the way we'll do questions is, because of the way the room is set up, I'll call on you and I'll repeat it for the audience who's listening, because I'm not going to run across the room. It's too early in the day. So, questions. Yes.
Haven't found any institutions that are doing, addressing the gap really well.
So, okay, audience members asking if they found any, say it again, institutions who are addressing the gap really well.
So we've got a working, oh, sorry, thank you, Dustin, my right-hand man. We have a working group established with some of the institutions who've taken part in the research, who've been our partner institutions. And they've been sharing with us some of what they're planning on doing with the data. So in terms of the journey that they're on, we're just starting to hear how the data is going to be impacting their practice. Through the link that I shared with you, we've started a JISC mail list, and through that we are notifying those on the list of blog posts. So what we're planning on doing is profiling the institutions who've got some really good practice to share in this space. So keep in touch with us and you'll get to hear some of that. Thank you.
You could repeat it.
Oh, okay. Dustin's given me the job of repeating your question.
Basically, but a lot of digital exclusion so taking an example, there's a lot of digital exclusion in the UK as well. Is any do you make work that looks at parallels in terms of student behavior and experience? It's all internal versus external.
So the question was around digital exclusion, and that we've talked about that within this context of looking at international students, but there's a lot of digital exclusion, digital poverty within home student experience as well. And so are we comparing the two? So that's where we think that when we look at, we're going to be doing a piece of work with our external researcher, Tabetha Newman, who's going to be looking at digital experience insights data through a comparative lens with international students and home students with this current data set. Something that I feel quite strongly about, having very recently been at an institution. So I only joined JISC in February, and I was very heavily involved in access and participation plans at the institution I've come from. And what I would really like to see is the EDI agendas within institutions be more reflective of the whole student population. Obviously, those access and participation plans, because of the Office for Students requirements, are focused wholly on home students. But I think we really need to address this imbalance in the focus on EDI in order to ensure that we are looking at the full population, and hopefully some of the work that we're going to be doing in terms of looking at the data that we've got through insights to be comparing home and international. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
That was great, your insights on student perspective here. We're talking about that being great to have a heads up on this is how it's going to work. Can you give me a little bit more information, that I have induction week in 2 weeks, and I'm going to have to do that with my students. At what point and how do you think? Is it pre-arrival that we should give this kind of information? Is it on arrival? And if it's on arrival, what do we do that is enough? And how do we do that?
Okay, so the question was around what sort of heads up that I mentioned previously would be useful, since for everyone pre-arrival. Thank you. So in my experience, I would have preferred it pre-arrival. I would have liked to have some resources set up for me to access throughout the academic year, even if it is in the form of a YouTube video, just to be able to go and refer to it, and how to, let's say, navigate if I really want to find a scientific journal article somewhere, if I can have a YouTube video on how to, I can access it through the library services, or how can I use Moodle, or how can I set up the Outlook email? Like, these were some things that were really necessary for me, and I had a hard time figuring it out on my own. So I do realize that I was very sort of panicky, and I wanted to have this information beforehand. I think it's best if it is provided to some extent in the form of either, I don't know, a link to like a Google Drive, or something that can be accessed by anyone afterwards. And, you know, if people are panicky like me, they can access it beforehand. If not, during arrival week and enrollment week, you can refer to it and say, go there. We have already collated some resources for you to make it easier.
Okay, thank you very much, Diana and Elizabeth. And I have a question.
Yeah.
You guys were looking at students. Now, I teach lecturers how to create online and blended courses, and I've seen that there is a digital imbalance, there's exclusion, there's digital poverty on the part of the staff. So what are your next steps as far as staff, or what suggestions would you have in that respect?
Was there something you wanted to say, Diana?
No,
Oh, okay.
I was impressed.
So we are planning a phase 3. You've seen from the introduction, this is a multi-phase research project, and phase 3 will take us back into talking to staff. So we anticipate that in running focus group activity, running interviews with staff will help us to gain the intelligence that I think you're pointing towards, that will come out in due course. Yeah.
All I have to add is that this is something that sometimes students don't think about. Like, we come here and we sort of expect to get help or be helped. And we don't realize sometimes the sort of gaps that happen behind closed doors, even on the part of academics. So I think even if these were made known to the students, maybe they would be more sort of empathetic and understanding in general, because it's easy to have a student be like, oh, this lecture, they didn't do this, they didn't reply to my email or whatnot. It might be because they don't have access to sort of resources. So, yeah.
And I should just add finally, and then I shall vacate the space, is of course that through JISC we have the Digital Capability Service and a fantastic discovery tool that enables staff and students to assess their digital capabilities. And from an institutional planning perspective or for a developmental perspective, to get the institutional data at the back end of that system to see where the strengths and areas for development are, is really a very helpful way to go as well.